Hicks, Maestro Hicks, distinguished voice coach, pianist, and worked with the Metropolitan Opera and worked with many, many distinguished artists that people would die to have worked with. There are so many experiences that you could share with us, and I really want to inaugurate this interview series to be able to really inspire musicians to be the best that they could be, because it is a competitive field. So let's get started.
Okay.
I know that you also are very knowledgeable on vocal technique, and I know when we worked together in New York, we started that process. If you wanted to dedicate one of our series to voice technique, I'm happy to be the presence for that.
Well, let me say right off the bat that I'm not a voice teacher. There are very three distinct classifications, and of course they can blend, in one person. But my primary focus is that of a voice coach, which is dealing with interpretation, style, language, presentation for an artist, for a singing artist. Whereas a voice teacher builds the voice, builds the instrument, so that I, as a voice coach, then instruct the singer how to play their instrument. And then you have repetiteurs, or pianists, for auditions and for helping people learn the notes, but they're not necessarily coaches. Now, having a 45-year experience with some of the greatest singers who ever lived, I've been very privileged to work with some of the greats. I have a very good working knowledge of singing technique, but that's not my focus. And I always will say to the singer, what would your teacher say on how to approach this note or phrase if they're having difficulty or anything? Then if they ask me directly, well, based on your knowledge of technique and you're working with this singer, what do you think would be a way? And I'd say, this is a way you might think of doing it. But I'm never going to come out authoritatively as a voice teacher, because I'm not.
Right. So there's
a very delicate balance. Besides, I don't want to anger any of the voice teachers.
There you go.
Who are my friends.
Amazing. And it is said that you might find 50 voice teachers and you would find 50 different vocal techniques. So when a singer goes to a master class, they could pick up some other tips. I found that many different teachers, each one of them had a different technique. I couldn't understand how there could be so many different approaches to voice. I guess voice is that complicated.
Well, it isn't really. Correct singing is actually very simple. To learn how to do it is not easy. I'd say a majority of the teachers want the same result, which is for the student to be a good singer. And Pavarotti, with whom I worked many years, would always say there's 200 roads to Rome, as long as they end up in Rome. So there's not 200 vocal techniques. There's only really one basic way to sing, which is correctly. But there might be 200 ways of describing the way to get there that brings about the same result.
Do you have any preference over the scientific approach versus imagery, the older technique?
I'm not a fan of imagery because it's too nebulous. I think the singing is a mechanical act. It's a physical mechanical act that, unless you know what you're doing, all the amount of smelling orange blossoms or imagining cherries on the top of your head or any of that is not going to serve you. You really have to learn the basic technique of singing. And the first step is how to take a proper breath. That's the key to everything, everything. And what's amazing to me, and I'm not going to mention any names, what's amazing to me is that a lot of teachers, voice teachers, don't even talk about the breath. It's the foundation of all singing.
Yeah, it's interesting that my teachers have not talked as much about breath because they presume that they don't want to add any stress to it.
Well, it's a slippery slope, and I'll tell you why. Because it's so easy, and I've done it myself, to try to teach a result. And what I mean by that is, or just to give a very basic example, I knew a teacher once who saw Pavarotti's stomach go out when he took a breath. Well, that's because he was overweight. And so he had a lot of stomach to be seeing when he took an initial breath. But that's the result. The stomach going out was a result of his taking a breath. That was not his technique. And yet the teacher was teaching her students, oh, you must push your stomach out because Pavarotti does. No, you don't push your stomach out. That's teaching a result. You teach the action that brings about the right result.